The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a gunshot through the dusty town square of Abilene, Kansas, and 23-year-old Sarah Mitchell felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces as she stood on the wooden platform in her faded calico dress, her hands trembling at her sides while the July sun beat down mercilessly on this God-forsaken day in 1878. "Gentlemen, what we have here is property from the deceased Henry Mitchell's estate," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the crowd of ranchers and townspeople who had gathered for the spectacle. "One wife, age 23, comes with the ranch as part of the debt settlement. Now, I'll be honest with you fine folks, she's barren as the desert, couldn't give Mitchell a single child in 5 years of marriage, so she's not worth much for breeding purposes. Worthless property, really, but she can cook and clean well enough, I suppose." Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation as cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, refusing to let them see her cry, even as her stomach churned with the knowledge that her late husband's gambling debts had reduced her to being sold like livestock in the town square. Henry had been a harsh man, cold and dismissive, and when he died 3 weeks ago from a bad batch of whiskey, she thought she might finally taste freedom. Instead, his creditors had seized everything, including her. "Let's start the bidding at $50, Horace," the auctioneer continued, mopping his brow with a stained handkerchief. "Come now. Someone must want a housekeeper, even if she can't give you sons." $30, called out old Jasper Green, a widower known for working his help half to death. "That's all she's worth to me." "40, another voice shouted, and Sarah recognized it as belonging to Dutch Sanders, a cruel man who had buried 2 wives already under mysterious circumstances. Her throat tightened with fear. This was her future, being sold to the highest bidder like a piece of furniture, destined to spend the rest of her days in servitude to whatever man wanted cheap labor. She had no family left, nowhere to run, and the law saw nothing wrong with this barbaric practice when debts needed settling. $50, Jasper countered, and the auctioneer looked ready to close the bidding. $500. The voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. Every head in the square turned toward the source, and Sarah's eyes went wide as she saw a tall cowboy pushing through the crowd. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty trail clothes and a black Stetson, and there was something in his steady gaze that made Sarah's breath catch. "500, the auctioneer sputtered, clearly shocked. "Sir, I must inform you that this woman is barren. She cannot bear children. Are you certain?" "I heard you the first time," the cowboy said, his voice steady and calm, "and I said $500. Do I have to repeat myself again, or are we doing business here?" The crowd fell silent, stunned by the astronomical sum. Sarah stared at this stranger, trying to understand why anyone would pay such a price for her, especially knowing she could never give him children. Most men in the West wanted sons to help work their land, to carry on their name. What could this cowboy possibly want with her? "Well, the auctioneer stammered, looking around the crowd for any counteroffers. When none came, he shrugged and raised his gavel. "Sold to the gentleman for $500, sir, if you'll come settle your payment." Sarah watched in a daze as the cowboy strode forward, counting out the money in crisp bills that he laid in the auctioneer's greedy palm. Then he turned to her, and for the first time she saw his expression up close. There was no cruelty in it, no calculating coldness. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like kindness, though she hardly dared believe it. "Ma'am Paranaina," he said quietly, tipping his hat to her. "My name is James Thornton. I have a horse tied up at the livery. If you'll come with me, we'll get you out of this sun." She nodded mutely, unable to find words, and descended the platform steps on shaking legs. James offered his arm to steady her, and she took it gratefully, feeling the solid strength beneath his sleeve. As they walked through the parting crowd, she heard the whispers following them. Speculation about who this stranger was and why he had paid such a fortune for barren property. The livery stable was blessedly cool and dim after the harsh sunlight. James led her to a beautiful chestnut mare and a sturdy bay gelding, both already saddled. He helped Sarah onto the mare with gentle hands, then swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. "Where are we going?" Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out hoarse and uncertain. "My ranch," James replied, turning his horse toward the west road. "It's about an hour's ride from here. I know you must have questions, Mrs. Mitchell, and I promise I'll answer them all once we're home. For now, just know that you're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." Something in his tone made her believe him, though she knew she should be more cautious. Still, what choice did she have? He owned her now, at least in the eyes of the law. As they rode out of Abilene, leaving the cruel laughter and judging eyes behind, Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope kindle in her chest. Perhaps this James Thornton, whoever he was, might at least be kinder than Henry had been. She did not dare hope for more than that. The landscape rolled past them in shades of gold and green, prairie grass swaying in the hot breeze. James rode in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing back to make sure Sarah was keeping pace. She was a decent rider, having grown up on a small farm before her parents died of fever, and she had been forced to marry Henry Mitchell for survival. That felt like a lifetime ago now. After nearly an hour, they crested a hill, and Sarah gasped at the sight below. A wide valley stretched before them with a creek running through it that glittered like silver in the sunlight. There was a sturdy ranch house built of whitewashed wood with a covered porch, a large barn painted red, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and she could see horses in a corral near the barn. It was beautiful and prosperous, clearly the home of a successful rancher. "This is yours, she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Yes, ma'am," James replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "Built it up over the last 6 years. It's called the Thornton Ranch, though some folks call it the Rising Sun on account of the way the light hits the valley in the morning." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the house, Sarah's mind raced with questions. Why would a man with such a successful ranch need to buy a wife at auction? Surely he could have courted any number of willing women in Abilene or the surrounding towns. And why pay $500 for a woman who had been publicly declared barren and worthless? James helped her dismount in front of the house, then led both horses toward the barn. "Make yourself at home," he called over his shoulder. "I'll be just a few minutes tending to the horses, then we'll talk." Sarah climbed the porch steps slowly, running her hand along the smooth railing. The porch was swept clean and had 2 rocking chairs positioned to catch the evening breeze. She opened the front door hesitantly and stepped inside, her eyes widening at what she saw. The main room was spacious and well-furnished, with a stone fireplace on one wall, comfortable chairs, and a dining table that could seat 6. The kitchen area was equipped with a modern cast-iron stove, copper pots hanging from hooks, and shelves stocked with supplies. Everything was clean but had a distinctly masculine feel, lacking the small touches a woman would add. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a bedroom with a large bed covered in a simple quilt. She was still taking it all in when James returned, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. He moved to the kitchen and pumped water into a kettle, setting it on the stove to heat. "Coffee?" he offered. "Yes, please," Sarah replied, settling carefully into one of the chairs at the table. Her whole body felt tight with tension, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to reveal his true intentions. James prepared the coffee in silence, then brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from her. He wrapped his large hands around his cup and met her eyes directly. "I imagine you're confused and frightened," he began, "and you have every right to be after what you've been through. So let me be straight with you, Mrs. Mitchell." "Sarah," she whispered. "Please, just call me Sarah." "Sarah," he repeated, and something warm flickered in his eyes. "I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to make you a proposition. Fair enough?" She nodded, gripping her own cup like a lifeline. "6 years ago, I came to Kansas with nothing but a horse and a dream," James said. "I worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny, and eventually bought this land. I built this place with my own 2 hands, and I've made it profitable through hard work and fair dealing. But a ranch is lonely work for a single man, and I've been thinking for a while now that I'd like a partner, someone to share this life with." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "I heard about the auction a few days ago when I was in town buying supplies. Heard them talking about Henry Mitchell's widow being sold to settle debts. I also heard the rumors about you, Sarah. Heard that Mitchell was a drunk and a gambler, that he treated you poorly. Heard that the town doctor declared you barren, but I also heard from Doc Preston himself over a whiskey one night that he never actually examined you. Mitchell just told everyone you were barren because he wanted an excuse for his failures as a man." Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What?" "Doc Preston told me in confidence that Mitchell came to him years ago with a problem," James continued gently. "A problem that would have made it impossible for him to father children, if you understand my meaning. But Mitchell was too proud to admit it, so he blamed you instead. Let the whole town think you were the problem." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as the weight of 5 years of shame and self-blame suddenly lifted from her shoulders. "I never knew," she whispered. "He told me it was my fault, that I was defective, that I had failed him as a wife." "You didn't fail anyone," James said firmly. "Henry Mitchell was a coward who couldn't face his own shortcomings. But here's what I'm proposing, Sarah. I paid $500 for you today, which in the eyes of the law makes you my property. But I don't believe in owning people. So here's my offer. Stay here as my wife. Be my partner in running this ranch, and I'll treat you with the respect and kindness you deserve. Or if you prefer, I can give you $200 and put you on a train to anywhere you want to go. California, New York, wherever you choose to start fresh. The choice is yours." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. "You would just let me go? After paying $500? "I paid that money to save you from men like Jasper Green and Dutch Sanders," James replied. "I've seen how Sanders treats women, and I couldn't stomach the thought of you ending up with him. But I won't force you to stay here if you don't want to. I'm hoping you'll choose to stay, but it has to be your choice." "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" James was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "My mother was sold at auction when I was 10 years old," he finally said. "My father died, left debts, and the creditors took everything, including her. I watched her stand on that platform with tears running down her face, and I was too young and powerless to stop it. A man bought her, took her away, and I never saw her again. I spent years tracking her, trying to find out what happened, but the trail went cold. I don't know if she's alive or dead, happy or suffering." His voice roughened with emotion. "When I heard about your auction, I saw my mother standing on that platform again. I had to do something. I had the money, I had the means, so I did. Maybe I can't save my mother, but I could save you. And if you choose to stay, well, maybe we can both find something good in this life together." Sarah's heart cracked open at his words, at the pain and sincerity in his eyes. This man, this stranger, had saved her not for selfish reasons, but because he understood her suffering in a way few could. She thought about his offer, about taking the money and running to some distant city where no one knew her past. But what would she find there? She would be alone, with no family, no friends, and no prospects beyond whatever menial work she could find. Here, she had a chance at something different. James Thornton seemed like a good man, honest and kind, and his ranch was beautiful. More than that, she felt a pull toward him, a connection forged in shared pain and unexpected compassion. It was not love, not yet, but it was the seed from which love might grow. "I'll stay," she said softly. "If you'll have me, I'll stay and be your wife, your partner. I'll help you build this ranch into something even greater." The smile that spread across James's face was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "You won't regret it, Sarah. I promise you that. Over the following weeks, Sarah settled into life at the Thornton Ranch. James was true to his word, treating her with unfailing kindness and respect. He moved his belongings into one of the spare rooms, giving her the main bedroom and complete privacy. There was no pressure, no demands, just a gentle partnership as they learned to navigate their new arrangement. Sarah threw herself into ranch work with enthusiasm. She discovered that she loved the rhythm of ranch life. The early mornings feeding chickens and collecting eggs, the afternoons tending the vegetable garden she planted, the evenings cooking hearty meals for James and the two ranch hands he employed, Miguel and Tom. Both men were respectful and friendly, clearly devoted to James and curious about the new Mrs. Thornton. James taught her to rope and work with the horses, his patience endless as she fumbled and learned. They rode out together to check on the cattle, and he showed her every corner of the ranch, sharing his dreams for expanding the herd and maybe breeding horses in a few years. She found herself looking forward to these rides, to the easy conversation and the sound of his laughter when she made a joke. One evening, about a month after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set in shades of orange and pink. James had brought out his guitar, something Sarah had not known he owned, and was playing a soft melody that floated on the warm air. "That's beautiful," Sarah said, closing her eyes to better appreciate the music. "Where did you learn to play?" "My mother taught me," James replied, his fingers never faltering on the strings. "She said music was food for the soul, that it could sustain you through the hardest times. I think she was right." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. In the golden light of sunset, he was heartbreakingly handsome, but it was more than that. She saw the goodness in him, the strength tempered with gentleness, the scars of his past that had made him compassionate instead of bitter. Her heart gave a strange little flutter, and she realized with a start that she was falling in love with her husband. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a quiet joy. For the first time in her life, she was in a place where she felt valued and safe, with a man who saw her as an equal partner rather than a possession or a disappointment. "James," she said softly, and he paused his playing to look at her. "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for bringing me here, for being patient with me. I want you to know that I'm happy here, happier than I've ever been." His eyes softened, and he set the guitar aside. "Sarah, having you here has changed everything for me. This house was just a building before, but now it's a home. You've brought life and warmth to this place, and to me. I hope in time that we might become more than just partners. I would like us to be husband and wife in truth, if that's something you might want as well." Her breath caught at his words, at the hope and vulnerability in his expression. "I would like that," she whispered. "I find myself caring for you, James. More than I expected, more than I thought I was capable of after Henry. You've shown me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness, and I think I'm falling in love with you." James reached across the space between their rocking chairs and took her hand, his thumbs stroking gently over her knuckles. "I've been falling in love with you since the day I brought you home," he admitted. "Watching you laugh with the horses, seeing you bring beauty to this ranch, sharing meals and conversation with you. Every day I fall a little harder." Sarah's eyes filled with happy tears. She stood, and James rose with her, still holding her hand. On that porch, with the last rays of sunlight painting the sky, she stepped closer to him and rose on her toes. James met her halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was tender and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, both were smiling. James cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "We'll take this at whatever pace you need," he said. "There's no rush. We have all the time in the world." But Sarah shook her head, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "I don't want to wait anymore. I've wasted too much of my life being afraid and ashamed. I want to really be your wife, James, starting tonight." That night, in the bedroom they now shared, James made love to Sarah with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He worshipped her body like it was precious, erasing the memories of Henry's rough indifference with every gentle touch and whispered endearment. When they lay tangled together afterward, Sarah felt reborn, finally understanding what it meant to be truly cherished. The months that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. She and James built their partnership into something strong and beautiful, working side by side during the day and falling asleep in each other's arms each night. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and Sarah proved to have a natural head for business, helping James negotiate better prices for their cattle and planning expansions. But there was one shadow that occasionally darkened Sarah's happiness, despite her newfound joy. Despite the revelation about Henry's lies, a part of her still wondered if she truly was barren. James never mentioned children, never expressed disappointment, but Sarah caught him sometimes watching families in town with a wistful expression. One evening in late autumn, nearly 6 months after she had come to the ranch, Sarah was feeling unwell. She had been tired and queasy for over a week, and that morning she had been violently sick in the wash basin. James had been worried, wanting to fetch the doctor, but Sarah had refused, insisting it was just a stomach complaint. But as she sat on the edge of the bed, calculating dates in her head, a wild hope began to bloom in her chest. She counted again, then a third time, her hands trembling. She was late, very late. And the sickness, the exhaustion, the tenderness in her breasts, these were all symptoms she had heard other women describe when they were carrying a child. She waited another week to be certain, afraid to speak her suspicion aloud in case she was wrong. But when the signs continued and even intensified, she knew she had to tell James. She chose a Saturday evening when the ranch hands had gone into town, and they had the place to themselves. James was in the barn checking on a mare who was close to foaling. Sarah found him there, running his hands over the horse's swollen belly with practiced care. When he saw her, his face lit up the way it always did, and her heart swelled with love for this good man. "James," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "can we talk?" He immediately came to her, concern crossing his features. "What's wrong? Are you feeling poorly again? I'm sending for Doc Preston tomorrow, whether you like it or not." "No," Sarah said quickly, then paused. "Actually, yes, maybe you should send for him. But not because I'm ill. James, I think I'm with child." The words hung in the air between them. James froze, his eyes going wide, his mouth opening and closing, as if he could not quite process what she had said. "What?" he finally managed. "But the doctor said—" "The doctor never examined me," Sarah interrupted, joy and tears mingling in her voice. "You told me that yourself." "Henry lied, James. He lied to protect his own pride, and I believed him because I didn't know any better. But you've shown me the truth. You've given me love and safety in a home, and now it seems we're going to have a baby." James let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He swept Sarah up in his arms and spun her around, his face buried in her hair. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We're having a baby." When he set her down, his eyes were wet with tears. "Sarah, you've already given me so much. You've made me happier than I ever dreamed possible. And now this? A child? Our child? Are you happy?" Sarah asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy?" James laughed, cupping her face and kissing her deeply. "I'm beyond happy. I'm euphoric. I'm terrified. I'm everything all at once. We're going to be parents, Sarah. We're going to have a family." Doc Preston confirmed the pregnancy a few days later, examining Sarah thoroughly and declaring her to be in excellent health. He estimated the baby would arrive in late spring, around May. As he packed up his medical bag, he gave James a pointed look. "I'm glad things worked out for you two," he said. "I felt terrible after that conversation we had about Mitchell, knowing his widow was suffering for his lies. You did a good thing, Thornton, buying her freedom that day. And look at you both now. This is how it should be. After the doctor left, James and Sarah held each other in the fading afternoon light, marveling at the miracle growing inside her. Sarah felt vindicated and whole in a way she never had before. She was not barren, not worthless, not broken. She was simply a woman who had been trapped in an impossible situation with a man who had blamed her for his own failings. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Sarah bloomed with health and happiness. James was attentive to the point of being comical, constantly fussing over her, insisting she rest more, trying to take over all her chores. Sarah tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding it came from a place of love and excitement. Winter settled over the ranch, blanketing everything in snow and turning the world quiet and peaceful. Sarah spent her days knitting tiny clothes and blankets, sewing diapers from soft flannel, and preparing the spare room as a nursery. James crafted a beautiful cradle from oak, carving delicate patterns into the wood during long winter evenings while Sarah read aloud to him from books they ordered from a catalog. They talked endlessly about the baby, debating names, discussing whether they hoped for a boy or girl. Sarah admitted she did not care either way as long as the child was healthy. James agreed, though he confessed that the idea of a daughter with Sarah's kind eyes made his heart melt. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly together, exchanging simple gifts. James gave Sarah a locket with their wedding photograph inside. They had gone to Abilene for a proper portrait after discovering the pregnancy. Sarah gave James a new pair of leather gloves she had painstakingly tooled with his initials. But the greatest gift was the future they were building together, the family they were becoming. As winter gave way to spring and Sarah's belly grew round and heavy, the whole ranch seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Miguel's wife, Rosa, who lived in a cabin on the ranch with her husband, became Sarah's constant companion, sharing wisdom from her own 5 pregnancies and assuring Sarah that she would be with her when the time came. In mid-May, on a morning when the prairie was carpeted with wildflowers, Sarah woke with the first pangs of labor. James, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks in anticipation of this moment, was instantly awake. He sent Tom galloping for Doc Preston while he and Rosa helped Sarah through the contractions. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. James stayed by Sarah's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring words of encouragement and love. When she cried out in pain, he hurt with her. When she said she could not do it anymore, he reminded her how strong she was, how brave, how she had survived so much and would survive this too. Finally, as the clock struck 2 a.m, Sarah gave one final push, and a thin, angry wail filled the room. Doc Preston held up a squirming, red-faced infant and announced, "It's a boy. You have a son." James laughed and cried at the same time as the doctor cleaned the baby and placed him in Sarah's arms. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the small, grasping hands, and felt her heart expand to a size she had not known was possible. This was her son, hers and James's, living proof that she was not barren or worthless, that she was whole and capable and blessed. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching the baby's downy hair. "We've been waiting for you." James knelt beside the bed, his arm around Sarah, his other hand gently cradling the baby's head. "He's perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly, but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son's face, Sarah knew exactly what to call him. "Thomas James Thornton," she said, "after your father and you. So he'll always know where he came from and who he belongs to." James kissed her forehead, overcome with emotion. "Thomas James," he repeated. "It's perfect. You're perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for giving me everything I never knew I needed." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Baby Thomas was a colicky infant who did not sleep much, leaving both parents walking the floors at night, taking turns soothing him. But every sleepless night was worth it when Thomas smiled, or grabbed Sarah's finger in his tiny fist, or gazed up at James with wide, curious eyes. Sarah discovered motherhood came naturally to her despite her fears. She loved nursing her son, loved the weight of him in her arms, loved watching James transform into a devoted father who sang lullabies off-key and made silly faces to earn baby laughter. The ranch continued to prosper. With Rosa's help watching Thomas during the day, Sarah was able to resume many of her duties, though James insisted she not overwork herself. They hired an additional ranch hand to help with the increased workload, a young man named Charlie who was grateful for the work and proved to be reliable and hardworking. When Thomas was 6 months old, Sarah and James took him into Abilene for supplies. As they walked down the main street, Sarah carrying Thomas and James proudly pushing a small wagon with their purchases, they passed several people who had been at the auction that day. Sarah saw their shocked faces, heard their whispered exclamations as they saw the baby. The auctioneer himself stopped dead in his tracks when he saw them. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, his eyes going to the baby, "is that?" "My son," Sarah said clearly, her voice strong and proud. "Thomas James Thornton, 6 months old. I believe you declared me barren and worthless property. You were wrong on both counts." The man's face flushed red with embarrassment, and he mumbled something before hurrying away. James squeezed Sarah's shoulder, pride radiating from him. Several other people approached to congratulate them, and Sarah realized with surprise that many in town had been rooting for them, had been glad to see the auction end the way it did. Old Mrs. Henderson from the general store smiled warmly at Thomas. "That cowboy who bid so high for you turned out to be quite the blessing, didn't he?" she said to Sarah. "Sometimes it takes someone special to see another person's true worth." As they walked back to their wagon, Sarah leaned against James, her heart full. "That day on the auction platform was the worst day of my life," she said softly. "But it led me here, to you, to this life, to our son. I wouldn't change a thing." "Neither would I," James replied, dropping a kiss on her hair. "You've proven everyone wrong, Sarah, but more importantly, you've proven yourself right. You're not barren or worthless. You're strong, capable, loving, and precious beyond measure. You always were. Some people just couldn't see it." The years flowed by like water, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy with his mother's kind heart and his father's steady determination. When he was 3, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose, who had her father's gray eyes and her mother's auburn hair. 2 years after that came another son, Henry Michael, named for both of James's grandfathers. The Thornton Ranch expanded significantly, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. Sarah's business acumen and James's ranching expertise proved to be an unbeatable combination. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original ranch house as quarters for their foreman and his family. Sarah often thought about the auction, about standing on that platform in her faded dress, listening to cruel words that had cut her to the bone. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to a different person. In a way, it had. That frightened, broken woman had died the day James Thornton placed his bid and changed everything. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Sarah and James would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over their land. They would talk about the future, about their dreams for their children, about the possibility of expanding into horse breeding like James had always wanted. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked one such evening, when they had been married for nearly 8 years. "Spending $500 on a woman everyone said was worthless?" James turned to her with such love in his eyes that it still made her breath catch after all this time. "Best money I ever spent," he said firmly. "I didn't buy you, Sarah. I freed you. And in freeing you, I freed myself from loneliness and gave myself the chance at real love, real partnership, real family. You've given me 3 beautiful children, a prosperous ranch, and a happiness I never thought I'd find. I'd pay $5,000, $50,000, any amount to have you by my side." "I love you," Sarah whispered. the words still feeling fresh and new even after all this time. I love you so much it sometimes scares me. You took a chance on me when no one else would, when I couldn't even take a chance on myself. You saw worth in me when I felt worthless. You proved them all wrong. No, James corrected gently, pulling her close. You proved them all wrong? I just gave you the space and support to do it? Everything you've accomplished, everything you've built, that's all you, Sarah. Your strength, your resilience, your capacity for love and growth. I'm just lucky enough to be along for the ride. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming innocent dreams. The ranch stretched around them, a testament to hard work and partnership. And in each other's arms, they had found something more precious than gold or land or success. They had found love, redemption, and proof that one act of compassion could change everything. Thomas came running out onto the porch, barefoot in his nightshirt. Mama, Papa, Lizzie had a bad dream. She wants Mama. Sarah rose with a smile, ruffling her son's hair. I'll be right there, sweetheart. You go on back to bed. As Thomas scampered inside, Sarah paused and looked back at James. Coming? Right behind you, he said, standing and taking her hand. Together they went inside their home, the house that love had built, to comfort their daughter and tuck their children in safely. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Thomas grew tall and strong, taking to ranch work with natural ease. He had his father's way with horses and his mother's head for numbers. Elizabeth was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the prairie and the animals. Young Henry was the wild one, always getting into mischief and making everyone laugh with his antics. When Thomas turned 18, a handsome young man who stood even taller than his father, Sarah looked at him and marveled at how time had flown. It seemed like just yesterday he had been that tiny infant in her arms, the baby who proved the auctioneer wrong, who proved she had worth and purpose. You're thinking about that day again, James said, coming to stand beside her as they watched Thomas working with a young colt in the corral. How did you know? Sarah asked. Though she should not have been surprised, after nearly 2 decades together they could read each other perfectly. You get a certain look, James said, wrapping his arm around her waist. Distant but peaceful, like you're comparing the past to the present and finding gratitude in the contrast. That's exactly right, Sarah admitted. I was just thinking about how different my life could have been. If you hadn't made that bid, if you hadn't been in Abilene that day, if you hadn't been brave enough to stand up in front of everyone and declare I was worth $500. I've thought about that too, James said quietly, how one moment, one decision can change the trajectory of everything. If I hadn't heard about the auction, if I hadn't remembered my mother, if I had let fear or doubt stop me, we would have missed all of this. The life we've built, the children we've raised, the love we share. It's staggering to think how close we came to never finding each other. Sarah leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Your mother would be proud of you, she said softly. You couldn't save her, but you saved me. And in doing so, you created a family, a legacy. You broke the cycle of pain and turned it into something beautiful. James was quiet for a long moment, and when Sarah looked up, she saw tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. I like to think she knows somehow, he said, his voice rough, that wherever she is, she can see what I've built, who I've become, that she knows her son turned out all right in the end. She knows, Sarah said with certainty. I'm sure of it. That evening they gathered the whole family for dinner, a boisterous affair with 3 grown children, and the ranch hands who had become like family over the years. Miguel and Rosa's children played with the Thornton kids, and the long table James had built years ago was filled to capacity with people and food and laughter. After dinner, Thomas stood up and cleared his throat nervously. Mama, Papa, I have something to tell you. I've been courting Emma Jensen from the neighboring ranch. Her father has given his blessing, And I'd like to ask for your blessing too. I want to marry her." Sarah's eyes filled with happy tears as James stood and embraced his son. "You have our blessing," James said warmly. "Emma's a fine young woman and her family are good people. I couldn't be happier for you, son." The wedding took place in late summer on the ranch, with half the county in attendance. Emma Jensen was a sweet girl with kind eyes and a ready smile, and Sarah could see that she and Thomas genuinely loved each other. As she watched them exchange vows under a flower-draped arch James had built, Sarah found herself crying tears of joy. "Thinking about our wedding?" James whispered, handing her his handkerchief. "We didn't have a real wedding," Sarah reminded him. "Just that auction and a quick signature on legal papers." "Then let's do it right," James said impulsively. "Let's renew our vows, have a proper ceremony. It's not too late." And so on their 20th wedding anniversary, Sarah and James Thornton stood before their family and friends and renewed the vows they had never properly made. Sarah wore a beautiful dress of cream-colored silk that Elizabeth had helped her choose, and James wore his best suit with a bolo tie Thomas had given him. Pastor Williams, who had baptized all three of their children, smiled as he addressed the gathered crowd. 20 years ago, these two people found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. What could have been a tragedy became a triumph. What could have been an ending became a beginning. Today we celebrate not just their marriage, but their partnership, their love, and their testament to the power of compassion and courage. When it came time for the vows, James took Sarah's hands and spoke from the heart. "Sarah, 20 years ago, I made a bid that changed my life. But the real bid I made wasn't measured in dollars. It was a bid for hope, for love, for the chance at building something beautiful with someone beautiful. You've exceeded every dream I ever had. You've given me purpose, family, joy, and a love deeper than the prairie is wide. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that you were worth every penny and so much more." Sarah smiled through her tears. "James, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me freedom when I was in chains, hope when I had despair, love when I thought I was unlovable. You proved to me and to everyone else that I was never barren or worthless, that I had value and purpose and deserved happiness. I promise to love you for the rest of my days and to make sure you never regret that bid you made 2 decades ago." "I never have and never will," James said, and then he kissed her as their family erupted in cheers and applause. The party went late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Old-timers from Abilene who had been at the original auction came up to Sarah and James, shaking their heads in wonder at how things had turned out. The story had become something of a legend in the county, the tale of the cowboy who bid high on a woman declared worthless and built an empire with her. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Sarah found herself standing alone for a moment, looking out over the ranch that had become her kingdom. The house glowed with lamplight, filled with people she loved. The barns and pastures stretched into darkness, containing the prosperity they had built together. And beside her, always beside her, stood James, the man who had seen her worth when no one else could. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing her question from years ago. "Not a single one," Sarah replied firmly. "My life began the day you bid on me. Everything before that was just prologue." The seasons continued their endless cycle, and the Thornton Ranch continued to flourish. Thomas and Emma had the first grandchild, a girl they named Sarah Rose, and the sight of her namesake in her arms made Sarah weep with joy. Elizabeth married a school teacher from Abilene and moved to town, though she visited the ranch frequently. Henry eventually settled down with a spirited young woman he met at a barn dance and brought her home to work the ranch alongside him. James's hair turned silver, and lines deepened around Sarah's eyes, but their love only grew stronger with time. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, market downturns and personal losses. Through it all, they had remained partners in the truest sense, facing every challenge as a united front. On a warm summer evening, when they were both in their 60s, Sarah and James sat on the porch as they had countless times before. The ranch now sprawled across twice the land it had when Sarah first arrived, and 3 generations of Thorntons called it home. Grandchildren ran through the yard, their laughter floating on the evening breeze. "I've been thinking about writing it all down," Sarah said suddenly. "Our story, for the grandchildren, so they'll know where they came from, what we overcame to build this life." "That's a fine idea," James agreed, "though I think the real lesson isn't about me or that auction or even the ranch. It's about not letting other people define your worth. It's about finding someone who sees you for who you truly are and standing together against a world that can be cruel and unjust." "It's about love," Sarah added simply. "The transformative power of real love, freely given. That's what you showed me, James. That's what changed everything." James reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. "We changed everything," he corrected, "together. That's how it's always been, how it'll always be. You and me, Sarah, until the very end." "Until the very end," she echoed, squeezing his hand. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their legacy unfold before them in the form of children and grandchildren who bore their names and values. The ranch that had started with a desperate bid at an auction had become a thriving dynasty, proof that love and partnership could overcome any obstacle. Inside the house, someone started playing the old piano, and the sound of a hymn drifted out to them. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the twisting path that had led her here, to this man, to this life. The auctioneer had called her barren and worthless property all those years ago, but a cowboy had bid high and proved them all wrong. He had seen past the cruel labels to the woman beneath, and together they had built something that would last for generations. Their love story would be told and retold by their descendants, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin in the darkest moments, and that one act of compassion can echo through eternity. As the stars emerged overhead and the prairie wind carried the scent of wildflowers, Sarah and James Thornton sat hand in hand, their hearts full, their legacy secured, their love eternal. They had proven that worth is not determined by cruel words or desperate circumstances, but by the strength of the human spirit and the power of 2 hearts beating as one. And in the end, that was all that mattered.